Hi, I'm Alistair Stewart. I'm an ecologist with the Flora and Fauna Division. I'm going to talk about one of our major projects that meets the department's strategic goals to protect and manage the Territory's environment and foster and strengthen partnerships and connections. From here on, it's probably best to switch to the slideshow, and we'll go to the next slide, please. And it centres on the central rock rat. They are critically endangered and were considered the most likely mammal in Australia to go extinct in the next 20 years. Next slide. They are only found here in the rugged and remote, high elevation ranges and mountains in central Australia. This habitat has been a refuge for the species from the threats that they face. Next slide. To recover the species and stop it from going extinct, we developed a recovery plan. This plan identifies the key threats to the species: predation by feral cats and extensive hot summer wildfires. Next slide. It also outlines the actions to undertake to recover the species, and we could not do this on our own. We have worked with a lot of people in the department, in this room, and other organisations to make this happen, including Territory NRM, Australian Wildlife Conservancy, Bushfires NT, Parks and Wildlife Commission of the Northern Territory, including the Alice Springs Desert Park, Central Land Council and the Anangu-Lurajuku Ranges, Australian Government and the Threatened Species Commissioner's Office, and Bush Heritage Australia. Next slide. That feral cats are eating rock rats, and our camera trap surveys have shown that they are throughout the landscape, including on the mountain ranges. With Parks and Wildlife Ranges, we've been experimenting with aerial baiting as a control method in Juracha National Park. This has been successful in both removing feral cats and improving the central rock rat population and other threatened species like the black-footed rock wallaby. Next slide. We've worked with Parks and Wildlife to increase the scale of this management to include all of the known rock rat locations on park. For the past 2 years, we've managed feral cats across this 1,100 square kilometre feral cat management area. This has involved planning the baiting routes, the safe use of chemicals, and conducting the baiting at an appropriate time of year to maximise the chances of success. Next slide. Rangers have been undertaking the baiting across the western half of Juracha National Park, the known stronghold of the central rock rat. With an open helicopter, this affords great views of the landscape, but also gives rangers a chance to observe areas of the park from a new perspective and be able to answer questions like where are the management tracks, the fences, the Larapinta Trail and camping infrastructure, what are the habitats and the potential fuel loads for fire in different areas. Next slide. That brings me to fire management. The central rock rat prefers patches of rocky ranges that have been burnt in the last 10 years. This provides regrowth vegetation and the food that it supplies. Rangers have been up on ridgetops, chipping breaks and conducting small patch burns to manipulate the habitats, and using aerial incendiaries to make small patch burns and improve the rock rat habitat. Next slide. There's been extensive planning and implementing of linear burns and fuel reduction to stop large wildfires and protect rock rat habitat. There's also been a huge effort towards fire suppression, as we will see in the bushfires presentation, with the large fires at the start of the year and again in October threatening rock rat habitat. Bushfires, Parks and Wildlife and interstate teams working together to control these threats. Next slide. A third recovery action being implemented is to create new populations of rock rats, to breed them in captivity and release them in new locations. Here we worked with the Alice Springs Desert Park and Australian Wildlife Conservancy to create these insurance populations. Next slide. Sourcing rock rats from the wild is a difficult job. Trapping in remote and rugged locations for a species that is already critically endangered and prone to handling stress. But together we developed protocols, provided training and worked in mixed groups of rangers, keepers and ecologists with different levels of experience and local knowledge. This meant we all had an enjoyable time and our planning around the good seasons in Central Australia meant we could successfully harvest enough animals. Next slide. The Alice Springs Desert Park created custom enclosures and carefully paired males and females from different locations while managing their tricky dietary needs. They've been successful and raised over 40 young rock rats, plus there's some extra freshly born litters, and have translated some of these to New Haven Sanctuary. Next slide. Australian Wildlife Conservancy run the New Haven Sanctuary and have a purpose-built, very large feral cat and fox-proof fence around a mountain range to house the rock rat and other threatened species. The captive bred animals from the Desert Park and animals sourced directly from Juracha National Park are doing well in their new home. Next slide. There's been some great media about this translocation, and it's been amazing to have collaborated with Parks and AWC on this project. Next slide. Another recovery action has been to search for more populations of rock rats. Outside of Juracha, the only other known population was at Ulumbaru, near Papunya. With the Anangullura-Juku ranges and Territory NRM, we have surveyed Ulumbaru and showed that it is a healthy population, increasing its conservation importance. We also searched the last place they were known from the 1960s, Mount Liebig and nearby Mount Palmer. Next slide. Despite previous surveys failing to find rock rats, this year we rediscovered those populations, greatly improving the known distribution of the rock rat. Next slide. So in the last 2 years, the central rock rat has gone from only 2 known populations, next slide, to 3 wild populations, plus the translocated population in New Haven, the pink square up in the top left, the captive breeding at the Desert Park, the pink square at Alice Springs, and just last month, working with Bush Heritage Australia, they've been discovered at 2 more places nearby. Next slide. In summary, in the last 2 years, we've managed to produce some quite extraordinary results. It's only with these partnerships and collaborations that we've been able to undertake these recovery actions. And I'd like to express our thanks to a long list of people that I'll summarise. To all the rangers that have worked in the field, from monitoring rock rats 20 years ago to those undertaking cat and fire management this year, and for hosting us when we visit on park. To the keepers at the Desert Park, unlocking the puzzle of successfully keeping and breeding rock rats in captivity. To the Indigenous rangers for the many searches in remote places and finally having great success in the last couple of years. To the researchers that have identified their habitats, food plants, worked out how and where to find rock rats, viewed millions of camera trap images and identified their threats and ways to manage them. To the NGOs providing support, collaboration and great success in their searches, translocations and the management for the rock rat. Next slide. And now the central rock rat is in a much better place. It's no longer the most likely mammal to go extinct. And working together, we can keep it that way.